Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're having a good day. My name is Danielle, for those of you who don't know, also known as Queen Bee. I thought that I would do a sort of stitch with me video for us. Oh, I'm stitching Marilyn Monroe's hair. But I'm doing it in a kind of I'm doing it in a slight gradation. The pattern calls for, it's right here. There she is. Cross Stitch with Art is the designer. Yeah, stitching her on, I want to say 18 count. It's either 18 or 22 count Ada, but I think it's 18. Yeah, Marilyn Sugar Skull. It's from the Cross Stitch with Art Etsy shop. Her name is Mariana, the lady who designs the patterns there, and she's really, really good. I got this pattern as a complimentary pattern because there was a buy one get one free sale. So I actually didn't pay anything for this pattern. I already had the Ada and I already had all the floss. So this is completely from my stash, and it was a free pattern, so it's like pretty awesome. I'm hoping to frame it with one of the frames I already have. That might be doable, maybe. We'll see. We'll see how I feel at the end. So that's that info. I have a tag to answer and everything, so I'm feeling right on my game today. Alright, I will be right back when I reconfigure. Okay, I've got it so that you don't have to look at my face the whole time. You can look at Marilyn's face. Yeah, so I'm just working on a light gradation of kind of goldy yellows, because yeah, the yellow, like I mentioned before, the yellow, it says 1.8 skeins, so almost two skeins, which doesn't surprise me considering I used like 3 for all of this black. But I don't have, and I didn't feel like going out for the yellow for her hair. So I thought, well, I've got a lot of different yellows, so I'm going to mix it up. I've got, do any of you do this? Do you keep all your floss for a project on one of these rings? I do, like all the time. I don't know, just helps me kind of see what's going on with the colors and stuff. So what I'm doing is I had this kind of leftover bit of floss. It's number 3827, and it's like this kind of goldy, it looks different for you than it does for me, but it's like a golden, very, very, I don't want to say orange, but it's more in the gold. But it's like a believable, almost blonde color. And then I've got this like light yellow. It's a really old floss that I've had forever, so I kind of want to use it. It's number 445 DMC. And this one is number 3855. So it's similar to this first one, the 3827. They're close, but this one's lighter. And this one is a lot cooler yellow and kind of a more vibrant, almost primary or cadmium kind of yellow. And I've got some white just white. It's not 5200, it's just white. So I will mix flosses together and just kind of create an overall kind of gradation of color. So I'm not following the chart. I'm kind of doing this by eye. So if you see me kind of stopping and looking all the time, that's why. It's because I'm kind of judging how light or dark something needs to be. So now that I've justified myself, we can start on the tag. This is the YouTube back to school tag. Do you have back to school, or did I have back to school jitters? Yeah, I'd say so. All the way through school, even university, I had a jittery kind of personality that way, just because the classes were all in different places, you know. I mean, it wasn't as bad by my senior most years of university, because I knew the campus really, really well, because I'd been to the same campus for years, and I knew all the faculty really well in my department, so I kind of knew what I was dealing with. But in high school, absolutely. Yeah. Even though I knew people and whatever, I had jitters. I would say the worst jitters I ever had was in when I had to go to school overseas. Because my family moved from here in Canada to Spain. In 1995, I remember, I was a teenager, believe it or not. And my dad was given this, I guess you'd call it an opportunity, but it was more like a sentence. My dad is Italian. His parents came over from Italy. Well, my grandfather came in 1949, and my grandmother came over afterwards in 1953. My grandparents were married by proxy, which means that my grandfather was in Canada already when they were married, and his father signed the marriage documents in Italy. So they didn't actually have a proper wedding ceremony because it was just cats are playing. It was just too expensive in those days to travel all the way back overseas. It was seen as kind of a waste of money, because I mean, in those days it was like a long journey, a really long journey, because he wouldn't have had the money to pay for like an airplane flight. Like, he would have had to take a train and then take a ship and then take some more trains, and he told me when he came to Canada by himself the first time, he said it was a 2-week trip. I think it was 2 weeks, either the whole trip or just the ocean part, because he had to sail on a small ship across the Atlantic through some pretty nasty waters, from what I understand. Everybody was seasick except him, because he doesn't get motion sick. But anyway, it was a huge production to travel that kind of a distance in those days. So anyway, my dad, being Italian like that, he spoke, my dad's first language is Italian, although you wouldn't know that talking to him. He doesn't have an accent because he was born here. He was born in Canada, but his parents didn't speak a ton of English yet. My grandfather was pretty good, but my grandmother took a little longer to learn because she was that much more resistant, I think. She really didn't want to be here, but she had to come. You did what you were told, you know? So at home, my dad spoke nothing but Italian until he was 5. And then he had to start school, started kindergarten, spoke no English. So he had to go in like with both feet and just figure it out. And he did. He speaks just fine now, but it was a real struggle from what I understand, which makes sense because years later, when I was a teenager, I was 14, my dad, because of this language skill, we were sent to Spain to basically to set up this kind of startup company, because my dad works in the aviation industry, specifically dealing with aircraft that are firefighting aircraft, so not passenger liners or anything like that. He deals with like the maintenance schedules of all these different types of airplanes that put out fires. And there was a company that I think the company my dad had worked for basically his entire career. I think they had helped them out financially or something, so there was an investment there. And nobody else in the company in Canada here had any kind of second languages or anything like that. Everybody is just English speaking. But my dad, having Italian in his background fluently, they said, well, you're the maintenance director of maintenance. Why don't you go over and kind of help establish a schedule for these people, and we'll give you, a bonus and all of this, and we'll move your family over there, etc., etc. Well, he went, but my mom didn't tell us that we were going to be going too until later. I thought it was just another one of Dad's one of Dad's business trips that he had to go on once in a while. It sounds like he was in the mafia, the Italian thing and everything. Yeah, I remember that. My mom, I was cooking. I was at the stove and I was making some Kraft dinner, macaroni and cheese, I should say, for everyone. And I remember I'd lit the element, the burner, and the water hadn't boiled or anything yet, but I was just so surprised when my mom said, well, we're going to be moving, which I thought was exciting. I was like, oh, good. I can move away and go to a different school and stuff, because I hated my school so much. And I thought, oh yeah, we'll just move to another house and whatever. No, she's like, well, your dad, you know how he's right now he's in France. And I was like, yes. And because he had to do something there on his way to Spain. And she said, well, we got word that there's a company over there that needs a more permanent supervisor from Conair to kind of oversee their startup. And I was like, uh-huh. And she's like, so they've asked your dad to go, and it's in Spain. And I was just like, "Ugh." And I remember I kind of shuddered a little bit, and I was holding the box of noodles for the mac and cheese over the cold, still cold, water. And I just dumped it all in because I just kind of went, ugh, because I was so surprised, and I knocked all the noodles in there. It's funny what you remember. And so that's how my mom kind of broke it to us that we were moving away, such a distance away, too. Because the original contract for my dad was for between 3 and 5 years. And I'm sure all of you can relate when I say that when you're 14 years old, 3 years is a lifetime. There's so much changes in those years, you know? So I was just kind of devastated. I was like, no. And so when I had to go to high school there for a little bit, and it was a very jittery time indeed. So that's my long story about yes and no high school jitters. Number 2, have I ever fallen asleep in class? Yes. Yes, I have. But I was in elementary school. It's not because I was bored or whatever. I actually started falling asleep a little, just kind of dozing, not like full on sleeping and snoring and everything, but just kind of just being exhausted. In the 4th grade, I remember, because my teacher called my mom and said, what time does Danielle go to sleep at night? Because she is just so wiped out. And my mom said, yeah, I know. I've been meaning to take her in and have the doctor check her out and maybe do a blood test and all that. That was when I had my very first blood test, was for that, because the doctor was like, well, it could be something. It could be that she's just fighting off a virus or something, or mono, or anything. Let's do a blood workup and we'll see. So they did, and he said, yeah, it's just fatigue from hormone change. Because I was starting to enter the puberty realm. Dun, dun, dun. Even though I was 9, I wasn't even very old. And I can see that now in my own daughter, now that she is 9. She's going to be 10 in January. And I totally see it in her. She's a lot more tired and grumpy because she's tired, and hungry because she is just starting to change, starting to fill out a little in the hips and everything else. So, yeah, I've got my eye on it for her. But yeah, that's why I haven't really fretted over it now that she's more tired. I'm like, yep, I was the same way. And yes, so that's the only time, though. I've never fallen asleep other than for that little while when I was starting to mature. Number 3. What was my most embarrassing moment? Most embarrassing moment. Trying to think. I think it was pretty embarrassing towards the end of my high school time. I think I was in about, well, it would have been either grade 11 or 12. I think it might have been grade 12, probably, but I don't recall. I think I've talked about this before on the channel, but I had a pretty nasty set of eating habits. I was what they call bulimirexic for a number of years, which means that there's binging and purging, And then after that, there's a period of starvation because you feel so guilty about the binging and purging. And that's why now I have to be careful with my teeth, in the, like, my rear molars. All things considered, my teeth are doing quite well, because I don't have any crowns or anything right now back there, which is great. But I do sometimes form cavities, even though I brush and floss and all that. It just because of all of the hydrochloric acid from purging, it just destroys your mouth, unfortunately. So yeah, my back molars are kind of hanky sometimes, so I have to be careful. Anyway, I was on one of those starvation sort of periods, if you will, back in this particularly set of, well, it happened a few times. And I remember the first time was I was in choir practice. School had ended for the day, and we had to stay and do a choir practice. So I was in the alto section, and I think all I'd had to, like, keep me alive at all that day was a can of Coke. That's what I used to live on. Cans of Coke, maybe a donut, maybe, but rarely. And I mean, that's usually I would drink that at lunchtime. And nothing else, no water, nothing. And I remember being in the choir practice room. We're working on some song, I don't remember. And all of a sudden the room got very hot and crowded feeling. And I kept wanting to fall forward. It was weird. And all of a sudden, my friend Catherine, who's since passed away, unfortunately, but anyway, my friend Catherine, I remember her arms around me. She was kind of protecting me, I thought, and I kind of regained consciousness, and everyone in the choir room was kind of staring at me, and I was just like, I didn't really understand what had happened for a minute, and they're like, hey, here's some water to drink this water, and, like, are you okay? Like, do you have, like, low blood sugar? Do you have, like, are you diabetic? Like, what's the matter? Kind of a thing. And I was like, nothing. And they're like, well, clearly there's something the matter. And I said, no, I'm fine. And they were like, I don't know about that. But anyway, that's one time. And then another time that a similar thing happened was at lunchtime, around that same time, because there was a period where I passed out a lot. And this other time was in the middle of the cafeteria, I remember, because I was standing, my friend, both Catherine and Sarah, both were like my buddies, and they worked at the cafeteria kitchen at lunchtime for a while. And I remember this particular occasion, Sarah was at the cash. She was doing cash register that day. And I used to stand there with her and hang out and whatever. And I remember she was doing her thing at the cash register. I was talking to her. And the thing happened again, where it was, all of a sudden, it was super hot. And I was like, oh, it's really hot in here. And that thing happened where it's like, you know how when you get up too fast sometimes? Well, maybe you don't, but if you have kind of a lower blood pressure, you probably know what I'm talking about. If you get up too fast, the room kind of goes dark, and you start to lose consciousness a bit just because your blood pressure is a bit low, so it doesn't get to your extremities and stuff, so you kind of lose consciousness. Well, that's the way it felt. It felt like an old style TV, where, for those people who know about old school TVs, they used to, when you turned them off, they would go woo, and they would get darker from the edges and then go toward the center and make a white kind of dot in the middle, and then that would disappear and it would be black. It wasn't just an instant black like we're used to now. Anyway, that's what was happening. The world was starting to go dark, and the sounds were kind of muffled, and I remember feeling nauseous, and I remember Sarah grabbed me because apparently I started to fall forward, and she saw that I was losing consciousness, so she brought me. She carried me along. Everybody's pointing and staring and being like, "Oh, there she goes again," it was kind of a joke. People are insensitive like that, but anyway, she brought me to the washroom because I felt sick, and I remember being sick, but it was all stomach acid that came up. There was no food in there there was no food to be seen in my body at that point. That was around the time I lost a lot of weight. To be healthy at that time in life anyway, at that age, I was supposed to weigh around 135 because I have a relatively large frame. I'm not very tall, but I have a larger frame. And I remember the doctor saying, yeah, your weight that is a good weight for you, that is not overweight, is about 135, because I was still a youngster. I was still like 17, 18. Well, I just kept losing weight. I went down to 98 pounds. And it was around then that, I started to fall over a lot and just lose consciousness. And, that's pretty embarrassing when you're that age. Rather than feeling concerned about my medical, state, I felt embarrassed instead about, falling unconscious in front of people. That was the worst part of it for me. But I felt like I had no choice but to treat myself that way. So, yeah, that's pretty embarrassing stuff. Even though it shouldn't be, it certainly was at that time, because people didn't talk about eating disorders and things the way they do now. Not at all. I mean, people knew about them and whatever, but they didn't, nothing was in place to really help young girls and women, not feel ashamed of themselves and want to starve themselves or whatever, because that's what was happening. I felt a lot of shame about a lot of things, so I treated my body like I felt, miserable. Anyway, question 4. Well, that's easy. Did I join sports teams? No. Sports suck. Hate sports. Always have. Number 5. What was my favorite grade? Okay, favorite grade. I'm thinking about this now. It's been long enough that I kind of have to really consider this. Well, I can tell you my worst grade, my worst year, emotionally, not necessarily academically, would have been the 9th grade. That was brutal. That was brutal. Because my family, we'd moved by then to Spain. I was there. And I had to go to school at this private school, and leave me alone, cat, right now, please. I had to go to this strange school that we were told had English-speaking staff and English, like it was like supposed to be an English immersion kind of place. So, because my parents were worried that, because I didn't know nearly enough Spanish to go to school in just Spanish. So, yeah, I got there and I was supposed to be in the 9th grade, okay? What we would consider the 9th grade. Because of my lack of Spanish, and because they'd lied and said to my parents, oh yeah, we have English immersion here. That was not true. It was all Spanish. There were a few instructors there who could speak some English. And there was one American there who spoke English and Spanish. But she'd been in Spain for like 20 some odd years by then. So she, that was a different story. They put me downstairs in my sister's class. My sister was in, let's see, she would have been in grade 5. Yeah, she was 10. So yeah, she would have been in grade 5. They put me down there with the grade 5s when I was in grade 9. It was humiliating. I guess that's a really embarrassing moment too. I was just like, why am I sitting here in this class with all these little children? And they explained to me that, well, you don't know enough Spanish to kind of keep up with high school level stuff. So this is where you're going to be for now. And I was like, why? This isn't supposed to be like this. My parents wouldn't have brought us to this school if that was going to be an issue. Ugh, there's a cat over there being a doofus. Sophia! Soph! She's such a dingus. Are you going to settle down? Alright. Hopefully. Anyway. Yeah, they'd lied about it. There was no English there. Everything was taught in Spanish, which my parents should have considered that as a very real possibility. We lived in the province of Salamanca in Spain, which is about an hour out of Madrid, an hour west. So we were really close to Portugal and stuff. So we were kind of in a more rural area to begin with. So, yeah, that was an issue. And, yeah, that was rough. That was my least favorite grade. Grade 9. And then partway through grade 9, we came home to Canada, and I went back to my old private school that I had been in for the 8th grade. And I hated that school too, but it was the devil I knew. I just didn't have it in me that year to start at a different school. I was just like, you know what? I hate the jerks that go to this school, but I do have a couple of friends that I miss, and, the devil is in the devil you know, right? So that's why I went back to my old school. So yeah, grade 9, that blew some serious chunks. It was terrible. That year could not end soon enough, So, there's that. What was my favorite, though? can't think of anything. Like, I mean, it was nice to, by grade 10, I was ready to move on. So I finished out grade 10 at this first private school. And by grade 11, like by the summertime before grade 11, I was like, look, I really need to make a change here because this is ridiculous. I hate this school. They're so oppressive. It was a strict Catholic school, which was a silly idea. It was a stupid, bad fit for me because I'm just not the kind of person to just take a priest's word for everything. I can't. I have to challenge it. I have to look at stuff and kind of question it, and they take that as a, kind of a sign of, bad behavior and stuff. So I was constantly getting in trouble. Not because I was being a bad kid. I wasn't a bad kid at all. It's just that I was not willing to let, and I don't want this to sound disrespectful. I am totally, I come from a Roman Catholic background. Like, my dad is Roman Catholic, although he doesn't practice. But, my Nona is a Catholic, and she goes to Mass, especially now that she's a bit older. And I would say she's got a relationship with the Lord. And, yeah, so I don't want to sound disrespectful, because I do respect people's, right to have their own faiths. But I just wasn't willing to take a priest's word for it. In my view, priests don't have the insight needed to sort of guide you or help you, especially if you're a woman and there are issues to do with reproduction, like birth control stuff. They have no right to have any say, in my experience, about what you can and cannot do with your body. If you've been raped and you become pregnant by that rape, you do not need to carry that child to term, in my experience and in my view. If you choose not to, okay? Don't get me wrong. If you're noble enough and a big enough person to endure that pregnancy and, keep the baby or even give it up for adoption, that's amazing. But I don't know very many women who would do that, because that's a bit intense. I know that would never happen for me. But I remember this. I remember a priest in his full regalia and everything coming into our classroom. It was a religion class that we were obligated to take, which from an academic standpoint I thought was pretty cool, because I liked theology. It was interesting. It is interesting. Anyway, I remember he came in with, his proper, robes and stuff on, and said that, premarital sexual relations are completely wrong and inappropriate, and those people who have engaged in such activities are going to burn in hell. I'll never forget that. I was in the 10th grade. And I remember being really hurt by that. Really hurt. Because by that point, I'd had sexual experiences. They were not consensual. So keep that in mind. They were not consensual. So I was pretty angry about that. Pretty angry about the whole sex thing, because I'd been taken advantage of and put in a very awkward situation. Um, and my my mom was an accident. She was a child of the 1950s when, people had accident children all the time. That's why my grandma got married when she was 17. You don't get married when you're 17 unless you're pregnant, usually. And that's exactly what happened to her. So, and the only reason that happened is because there was no access to birth control. And, of course, abortion was illegal. But my grandma said, I thought about it, though. I really did. Because I really didn't want to have a baby. Because I really didn't want to ruin my life. But, and she was worried that it would, you can die from back alley abortions. So that's why my grandma got married instead and had my mom and raised her and all that stuff. I think that's BS. She didn't have to, nowadays, there's no way you should have to do that. That's craziness. So when that man came into the room and said that, I was just so hurt on so many levels. And I remember going up to my teacher after the priest was gone, at the end of class. People were leaving the room and everything. I went up to this guy and I said, "Am I a bad person?" And he just kind of stopped and didn't know how to respond to that. Because I was generally known as a good student. I was polite. I was nice. I did my work. I did my work well. I didn't misbehave. I didn't do bad things. So that was my general reputation. So I asked him, I just said, am I a bad person? And he just said, and I was like, well, just so you're aware, you don't know what I've been through. You don't know what my background is. If I told you some of the things that I've been through and the things that I know, your opinion of me might change entirely. To 180 degrees. I feel very hurt and disrespected by what was said to the class today. And he just kind of stood there wide-eyed, staring at me like, I can't believe you're telling me this. Because I was being kind of what they would have probably thought of as somewhat insubordinate and disrespectful and all that. But I was like, no. Listen here. You don't know. There is such a thing as, engaging in sexual relations that are not consensual. I didn't consent to what happened to me. It was not consensual at all. But it happened anyway. This shit happens to people, and, a woman shouldn't have to pay with, like that. By feeling not only ashamed of what happened to her, but feeling like her community that's supposed to love and nurture a person, feeling like her community is now going to shun her because of the way she has, conducted herself. Well, you wore the wrong thing, or you asked for it, or, there was, at that time anyway, quite a conviction about that. Still, that, a woman could be, asking for this. And that's the way I had been treated, and I was really, really angry about that. So I kind of took it out on this teacher and blindsided him like that, but I felt like it was important to do that, to kind of raise awareness or something. I was kind of like being an activist, I guess. But I just thought, I'm not being I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, like, that's fine for you to have faith, like the traditional Catholic faith, that's fine. But when you're using it to shame people and stuff like that, like, that's just wrong. It's not what Jesus would have done. I mean, I don't want to, offend anyone, like I say, because I know religion is kind of a tricky subject, but I've had to deal with it a fair bit in my life, so sometimes it comes up. So by then, it was time to move on. I think that's sort of what it boiled down to. It wasn't because I was expelled or had anything like that happen. It's just that I needed to start afresh. Even though it meant I wouldn't see my friends my good friends on a daily basis anymore. They lived in the same city as me. They lived close enough by that I could just drive over and see them, because by then I was driving. And I did do that. But I found this, secular high school in the next city over. And it was an arts-oriented school, and that was sort of where my strong suit was anyway. So I went over to that school for the last 2 years of high school, and those were like, even though they were hard years, they were better than grades 8, 9, and 10 rolled together, for sure. Even though I lost a tremendous amount of weight, went through a whole hell of a lot of bad stuff, at least I got to do it there, at that school with those people. And I wasn't at that Catholic school anymore. I still know, I have a couple of friends still from that Catholic school, though, that I still talk to and I still know. They're some of my oldest friends. Anyhow, grade 6. Question 6. Did I ever have to wear a uniform? Yes, I did. That Catholic school that I was just talking about, you wore a uniform. It was an ugly uniform, but we wore one. And when I was in Spain, that school had uniforms as well. And their uniforms were extra obnoxious because we all had to wear neckties. Even the girls. We had to wear these neckties, and it was so annoying because I didn't know how to tie a necktie. So I had to get my dad to do it. Because I didn't know how. I'd never had to tie a necktie. That was something, a man wore, not a woman. So when I found out I had to wear this silly necktie, I felt really weird. So, yes, I had to wear, I have a needle in my mouth, just a second here. So yeah, I did wear uniforms, and they always look hideous, no matter what you do. Hideous. They were traditional uniforms with, they were kilts. In both cases, I wore a kilt and a blouse, and in Spain I wore a pullover sweater, but in Canada I wore a cardigan instead of a pullover. I really didn't want to wear pullovers if I didn't have to. You had the choice. In Canada you could pick which type of sweater. But yeah, that was that. And number 7, favorite teacher. Oh, who was a favorite teacher? I can't say that I was overly close with my teachers. I was kind of hot and cold. I was developing borderline personality disorder at that age, so my moods were kind of more erratic than a regular teenager. So I was hard on people. I was hard on teachers. And sometimes I wasn't, but a lot of times I was. I'm friends with one of my teachers from my Canadian Catholic school experience, Mr. Fraser. He was really, 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 really nice man. Very patient and sweet. He's still a teacher at that school. I just remember meeting him. He was a substitute for a French class that I was in, because I was in I was in a grade higher for French than I needed to be, because I'd been in French immersion when I was a kid. So my grade level of French was like ridiculously easy, so they just skipped me ahead, which was fine. And that was when I met Mr. Fraser, because he came to substitute for grade 9 French. I was in the 8th grade, and I was in this grade 9 class for French. I remember he spoke French because his wife is French Canadian, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, he knows French. And eventually I guess they hired him on because they needed another teacher, and he's a really good teacher. And he went on to teach science and what else? I don't remember what else. I think it was just science, if I'm not mistaken. He was really, really cool. He's really, really nice. He's a cute, nerdy guy. He's really tall and thin, and he's got little aviator glasses, and he looks the same now as he did then, like 20 plus years ago. Super nice guy. Really nice. In a world of mean men, he was a very, very welcome mirage. Number 8. My least favorite teacher. Who was my least favorite teacher? Oh, there were so many. Well, I remember one of the he wasn't my least favorite, but he was generally not a favorite. Was his in Catholic school? His name was not Mr. Fraser. He was well liked. No, Mr. Calcivera was his name. People called him Mr. C for short. He was Italian as well. I liked him because I understood him. I understood his kind of point of view and where just where he was coming from. So he and I got along fine. But the other kids just didn't get it. They didn't understand him. They didn't get him. So they treated him like really badly. They used to do mean things to him, like, just do things to embarrass him, and, say that his sweater looked like it was cat pee, and that his glasses were lame, and, like things like that. Like, just kids being jerks, basically, was what it amounted to. But when you've got kids being jerks to you non-stop, I mean, that is very draining, So I remember he used to shout at the class after, he would just lose his mind after a while. He would just get so angry. And I get that. It's because kids were not listening to him. They were being just disrespectful, and there was just nothing he could really do about it. And, I mean, that's like the ultimate place to, of frustration, I would think, to be stuck in. Oops, you can't see what I'm doing. So, I used to stay behind after class, and I'm sure that some people thought I was just being a kiss ass, but I wasn't. I wasn't being patronizing, and I wasn't trying to suck up or anything like that. I did my work just as hard as everybody else. But I remember feeling badly about it. I remember feeling like in staying behind and like erasing the board and just kind of helping them with stupid little things like that. I remember that was my way of saying, I'm sorry that my class is full of a bunch of assholes. I mean, really, that's sort of what it was intended to mean. And that was sort of where I was coming from. I don't know if that made any impact or if that's the way he perceived it. I don't know. But I hope maybe he did, because I wanted to kind of show him that not all of us are asswipes. Like, not all of us are throwing spitballs at you and calling you names and, just being terrible. Like, there are some of us that are totally fine with you, because I think it's because he was a really smart guy. He taught math, science, and computer science. I learned a lot about computers from Mr. Calcevera's class, because we had to learn about, the boot cycle and, what a computer does when, in those days anyway, you don't really see it anymore. But in those days, how you used to see all the DOS go by bloop, 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 when you booted up your computer. Well, he told us what that all meant. He taught us how to look at it and watch it go by and slow it down so that we could actually read it and understand it. And so, I mean, pretty much everything that I know about computers at all came from that very class, really. And that was like, the computers ran Windows 95, I think, on the server in there, which would have been pretty new at the time. But we didn't use Windows ever. We used to run everything through DOS. We had to learn how to deal with that and do that with, Hi, Sophia. We had to learn how to, run everything from the C prompt and stuff like that. Like, it's a way more intense computer experience. Holy cow. And I learned algebra from him, which was no small feat, but I did. I kind of figured out how to work my way through it. I was just slower to pick it up because it's just not my strong suit. But he was so nice about it. He was just like, okay. So I think that's basically it for other people's least favorite teachers. For me, I think my very least favorite teacher from high school is Mr. Ames. He was the worst. He was just such a creep and such an asshole. I hate all the language I'm using, I'm sorry, but yeah, like, oh my God. Seriously, man. He was sleeping with one of the students in our class that graduated with us, and it was disgusting, because at our graduation ceremony, guess who won all the awards? Yeah, you can guess. Yeah, it was disgusting. And he hated the fact that I didn't agree with, he was an English teacher and a science teacher, but I think he was just a frustrated intellectual who was not actually good enough at any of those things to teach at a post-secondary level, because I remember him, harping about, well, you can't write, you don't know what you're doing. He actually told me, when I said I would like to go to university and write and study poetry, he said not to bother because I can't write. Honest. Hand on a stack. He said that. And you know what? I believed him. I didn't go immediately into college or university after grade 12 because I thought he was right. I felt that badly about myself that I believed this jerk. He made me mad when he said what he said, but I thought on some level he must be telling me the truth, even though I don't agree on another level. Like he was profoundly impactful in the worst way. You know what I mean? He was one of those teachers that he just didn't understand or care that he had the influence that he had. He just did not respect that at all. And I mean, my parents, well, my mom anyway, had words with him on a couple of occasions because he just was an asshole to everybody. Because, I mean, that was just the way he was. He just couldn't, he was just the worst. So yeah, even to this day, and I mean, it's been 20 years since I graduated high school. To this day, if I ran into him on the street, I would still kick him in the nuts because he was just such a jerk. I would say, and the next question is the worst thing I did at school. The worst thing I did that almost got me expelled was walking out of an anti-abortion slideshow that they were putting on at the Catholic school that I went to. They were showing this progression, and I perceived it as a threat. It was this pro-life group that came in, and they had this slideshow of basically what, I remember I walked out before it got anywhere graphic, but they had us all in the gym, the entire school, and they had this slideshow projection, and there were instruments and medical instruments, the way they laid them out on a tray, and they had the stirrups and the kind of little medical bed thing that you lie on and stuff. And I mean, I knew that this was gonna go kind of ugly places. To this day, I don't know how in depth it got as far as procedures and blood and gore and everything. I don't know. But I got up and walked out. I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything to provoke anyone. I just said, in my head, I don't have to put up with this garbage. So I'm not gonna. I ran out of power, so I had to recharge the batteries. So that's why if Marilyn looks a little more filled out, it's because she is. While I was waiting, I did some more of her hair. Probably because I was a hairdresser. I really like hair. Taking my time with it, making it pretty. Anyway, so I was talking about the worst thing I ever did at school, and yeah, that's right. I walked out of a pro-life slideshow because I could feel this sense of dread with the opening slides, and I could just feel this, because of the there's, I mean, some of the instruments that I saw in the beginning were basically normal. I mean, they were normal medical instruments that you would see in in other scenarios like the speculum and things like that, like for a regular, normal pelvic exam. But I don't know. I just had this terrible, terrible feeling. I said nothing, but I was shaken, and I just did not want to be there. I just had this terrible feeling. And I remember I was sitting next to a friend of mine, and I said, I'm gonna go. And she said, okay. So I stood up quietly and got off. We were on bleachers, I remember. So I stood up and sidled out, to the middle, to the stairs, and then I walked down and left. And I remember people in the school that were there, they were all kind of staring at me like, what is she doing? And I could hear this like rumbling, being like, where's she going? What is she doing? And I didn't respond or make a scene. I just left. And I went, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do after that. But I remember I went into the washroom and just kind of stood there. I didn't know what else to do because I felt miserable. I think that was probably one of the very first anxiety attacks I ever had, because I was deeply hurt and just like had all those anxiety symptoms of shortness of breath and that feeling of dread and that sweatiness that happens, and oh my God, it's the worst feeling. And I remember one of the female teachers came into the bathroom and said, what are you doing here? And I said, like I couldn't speak properly. And she said, this is a mandatory assembly. You have to go back in. And I said, I'm not going back in. You can't make me go back in there. I'm not stopping them from showing it. I'm not stopping the other kids from watching it. I just choose not to, okay? Please? And I remember they made a huge case out of it, and they kind of tried to make an example out of me. And I remember being sent to the principal's office, and which was like unheard of. I never got sent to the principal's office, like ever. Like maybe twice in my entire school, life. And I remember they said, well, this is, you were required to see that. And I'm like, no, I wasn't. I know it was happening. I know it was going on. I don't need to have it like in my face, literally in my face. Like, no, this is stupid. And, I just kept saying things that I thought made sense. I was like, why are you treating me badly? This isn't right. And I remember they said, well, fine, we're going to phone your parents. And I said, fine, go for it. They're not going to be mad. And they got in touch with my mom, because she was at home, and they told her the story, and she said, okay. And I got to talk to her for a minute, and so I told her my side of the story, and she said, yeah, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. And I was like, Mom, are they gonna, they're gonna throw me out? And she's like, not if I have anything to say about it, they won't. And my dad, too. My dad was totally on my side. He was like, no. That's wrong. They're wrong. You're not wrong. And I said, well, thank you. And it was one of the rare occasions, unfortunately, where my dad was actually on my side. He usually wasn't. But in this case he was. And he said, you know why I'm not angry? It's because you're a leader, not a follower. And I was like, oh, I didn't think of it like that. I just thought it was a terrible situation. So, that, I would say, is like the biggest deal. The biggest thing I ever did that was kind of wrong, but not really wrong. You know what I mean? But it certainly would have had the most significant repercussions, I guess. So, that was that one. Did I have a car? Yes, I did. I had a Volkswagen Beetle, a vintage one. It was, and the body was a 1969, but the engine was built to 1972 Beetle specs. So, for a while anyway, I went through 2 engines in that car because I had it for a long time. I believe there's video of it on this channel, that car. The bug in my garage and when they towed it away and things like that, because I eventually had to sell it. But I got it when I was 16, and I drove it until I was 20, I guess I was 24 when I didn't need to use it anymore, because we had one car and that was enough, so I just stopped insuring it. But I sold it to a lovely couple who bought it for their daughter for her first car, and I was like, sweet, that's perfect. So as far as I know, they still have it. And yep, my dad and I built that car from scrap, basically. We put it together ourselves, looking at books, reading books. So my dad is a domestic kind of car guy. He doesn't, until that point anyway, he didn't know or work on foreign stuff. So that was a learning curve for sure. Me and that car had lots of adventures together. So, yes, I had a car. Number 11. Am I still friends with anyone from school? Yes, actually, from both elementary and secondary. And some post-secondary people, too. Not like friends necessarily, but like I know them and we're friends on Facebook and stuff. Yeah, from elementary, I've got, let's see, Lindsay and Desiree, although she calls herself Des now. Chris and Ian and this is all elementary when I was in French immersion still, so yeah, it's going way back now. And let's see, when I was still in Alberta, I went to middle school and I had my first boyfriend. He was very nice to me. And I still know him. Every so often we chat. He's married and he's got 2 kids and he's a busy guy doing his thing. But we're still very friendly. I think because, I don't know about you, but for myself, your very first love that you have is just so pure. I don't know. I don't know why or how that happens, but it's like when you're young and super innocent and super naive and just like raw with no no kind of scarring and trauma and all that, it's like you have a better sense almost of what love kind of is, and you know, it's not, your perception isn't all cluttered up with just negativity and distrust and all of that. He and I were really, really, really close. He was the first person I had a slow dance with, first person I used to hold hands with, and it was just so, it just makes you feel warm and fuzzy to think about. Well, at least it does. My mom went in the mailbox and she's like, "Hey, there's some mail here for you." And I was like, "There is? That's weird. Who would send me anything, you know?" And it was this letter. I still have it to this very day. It was a letter from Louis. He is Acadian. His family is from New Brunswick, but they live in Edmonton. So he speaks, his parents speak French. That's their native language. So he grew up speaking French and English. And that's why his name is so French. Anyway, I was like, what? And I tore open this letter and I read it. And it wasn't a long letter. It was probably 2 pages. And, oh, my husband's calling me. Just a moment. Man, you guys, it would be cool if I could actually shoot a video without being interrupted. That would be great. My husband needed me to drive him across town. Alright. Now. Oh yeah, I was talking about friendships and things. Yeah, so yeah, Louis was, we were gonna get married. I had a promise ring. I still have it, actually, someplace. So it's like a sort of engagement ring, but it's not really. It's one of the, I think they call it, some places I think they call it pinned. Other people, I think they call it lavaliered. It's like the fancy word for it. In my life, it was always called a promise ring. And yeah, it was just this really, really, really charming little princess cut diamond. Oops. Little tiny, tiny diamond. Little skinny mini ring. Super, super cute. Because, I mean, I was 15 years old. We were just young people. But the feelings were real. I can look back on it all these years later and go, yep, I really love that boy. If anybody's bugging me, no, just a push notification. Good. Anyway, had I not, which kind of, actually, that brings us to the next question. Apart from other friends that I have from Facebook and whatever, there's the last question is there anything you would change? Now, this is an interesting question. It could be its own video, really. The only thing that I look back on and I'm frustrated by is the fact that my dad's job is very specialized, And so when I grew up basically in Alberta, which is like the prairies, basically, but still western. Excuse me. When the airport that my dad worked at, when that branch of the company closed down because the airport was closing, we had no choice but to go back to the original airport where that company began, which is in the lower mainland of British Columbia, which is, I mean, that's why I was born there. And yeah, the only reason my parents moved was because of my dad's career. And there was basically no other job opportunities. Otherwise, I think they probably would have stayed there in Edmonton because they liked it. But it was either we moved back to British Columbia to be at that airport, or nothing. My dad would have been without a job. So, I mean, I get why it happened the way it happened. But at the same time, I had to say goodbye to a lot of people that I grew up with. And my boyfriend. I miss him. I missed him so terribly. And it was like fate was cruel, if there is such a thing as fate. It was cruel and unusual. Because, hello Victoria. If you see any wiggling around, it's because there's a tabby cat walking all over the place. Being like, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? There she goes. My parents' friends that they knew from years before, their son began abusing me, but because my parents were so kind of isolated, I felt like I would ruin the friendship if I said anything about it. So these things all conspired to ruin things. Hence all the stuff in high school being such a problem. Because this was all going on while I was in high school and being told by people that, basically you should be ashamed of yourself, if you've ever done anything like this. But they don't take into account that you might have been subjected to it rather than willingly participating in it. So things turned ugly pretty quick for me. And that's like the one thing in life that it's just this strange delineation. There's, my life up until 12 years old, and then there's my life post 12 years old. And it's like it's smack right there. That's when things really, really shifted. It happened to coincide with, becoming a teenager, but that's just a coincidence. It wasn't because I, started going through full-blown, puberty stuff and being moody and all that. It was just the way the circumstance played out. It just turned really, really dark and ugly. And, I still have those problems today. I still have to take medications to help alleviate some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, generalized anxiety, borderline personality, depression, all of this stuff. I mean, I'm on a much lower dose and on fewer drugs than I used to be. But, I mean, I never needed drugs, ever. But as soon as I got to be 15 and I couldn't take it anymore, and I had to tell my mom what had been going on for the past 2 years, she was pretty devastated, and I don't blame her. If my daughter came home and told me that this had been going on, even if it only happened once, I don't know what I would do. I would just be, I don't know. I don't even know. I'd be so hurt. Like, so hurt. I mean, I'd be bashing the door down, and I would go to prison for it. I would. If somebody ever did that to my girl. Oh my God. Anyway, that was the last question. And I feel like this video is going to be long, and I apologize. But, yeah, I hope next time when I do a paint with me or a stitch with me video that I will have my other camera working. I've got another one that is small and can be mounted on my head. I'm going to call it here, and I'm hoping that I can show you this finished stitch, and then do a video maybe of how I like to frame my pieces, or if I think of another way to finish this object, I will take you on the journey with me. It'll be fun. And thanks for watching. Thank you, new subscribers and continued subscribers. You're all awesome. You are the reason for me to continue making videos. So, I will see you next time. Bye-bye.